The New Orleans Saints could be sneaky good this season. The Saints are kind of a boring team, but they do have a second-year head coach and a new starting quarterback. There are some big names on the offense like Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, and Chris Olave even made a bit of a splash as a rookie. But overall, what makes the Saints so interesting is that they're the favorite to win their division. The NFC South is pretty bad, and the Saints look like the best team on paper. And with Tom Brady no longer standing in the way, the Saints could really run the division in 2023. Last season was a pretty weird one for the Saints. Sean Payton ended up announcing his retirement, and it led to Dennis Allen being named New Orleans' next head coach. Now, it allowed things to not be completely different. Dennis Allen had already spent 12 years with the Saints, all with Sean Payton. Now, he did have a stint in between as the Raiders head coach for 3 seasons. To say they weren't very good in that period is a bit of an understatement. Oakland went 4-12 in each of his first 2 years, and then he was fired after an 0-4 start in 2014. Still, that was a long time ago, and he had spent a ton of time behind and learning from Payton, so it made sense to still turn to him. It's also worth noting that the Saints offensive coordinator is still Pete Carmichael. He's been in New Orleans since 2006 and has been the OC since 2009. The Saints have a similar roster and staff from when Payton was there, but there are some very big new changes that make New Orleans just feel new. They hired Joe Woods to be their new defensive coordinator. He spent the last 3 years as the DC in Cleveland. But the clear biggest addition for the Saints is Derek Carr. Drew Brees retired in 2021, and that left a pretty big hole on the roster. When you lose a Hall of Fame quarterback, you're probably going to get worse at the position. That season, they had to start 4 different quarterbacks: Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, Trevor Siemian, and Ian Book. It was ugly. Then last year, Winston started a few games, but it was mainly Andy Dalton leading the way. There's been a lot of uncertainty behind center since Brees retired, and the Saints clearly wanted to change that, so they signed Derek Carr to a 4-year, $150 million contract. Now, there is an out in 2026, though. Carr was really consistent with the Raiders over 9 seasons. He never had postseason success, and he wasn't anything too crazy, but he was just consistently solid, and at some point, that's not enough. Las Vegas decided to release him, but it didn't take long for him to find a new home in New Orleans. Now, both Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill are both on the roster still, so if Carr gets hurt or just flat out sucks, the Saints do have some options. They did also draft a quarterback in the 4th round, Jake Haener. The dude's 24 as a rookie, but he's experienced and he was good in his last few years at Fresno State. Now, of course, if everything goes to plan, we're never going to see Haener or Winston on the field this season. Derek Carr's offensive weapons in New Orleans are ironically probably worse than they were in Las Vegas. To be fair, that's really just because he did play with arguably the best wide receiver in football, Devontae Adams, and Josh Jacobs did literally just lead the league in rushing yards. The Saints still have some good players, though. First and foremost, Michael Thomas is a wild card. 4 years ago, you could have made the case that he was the best wide receiver in football. He was the Offensive Player of the Year, led the league with 1,725 yards, and had an NFL record 149 receptions. Yeah, he was good, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy since, and has just 16 catches over the past 2 seasons. Who knows if he can A, stay healthy, and B, what he even looks like now after years of injuries. Now, really, Michael Thomas isn't even the number 1 in New Orleans, though. It's probably Chris Olave. The Saints took him 11th at last year's draft, and he made one hell of an impact as a rookie with over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. The Saints expect him to be their future top guy, and he's already shown flashes that he could be. Rashid Shaheed also came out of nowhere last season. He was undrafted, and then he put together a year with almost 500 yards. I think he'll be that number 3 if Michael Thomas is actually on the field. Then tight end Juwan Johnson had a good 2022 with 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. The biggest name on the offense, and maybe on the entire roster, is Alvin Kamara. He has been insanely consistent in his career. He's had over 700 rushing yards and over 400 receiving yards each season. Although last year he did only have 4 touchdowns, the least of his career, he's still going to have a major role in the offense, but he probably won't be the goal line guy anymore and may lose some touches. And that's because New Orleans signed Jamal Williams this offseason, who is coming off of not only a 1,000-yard season, but he just led the league with 17 rushing touchdowns. Now, when it comes down to the offensive line, line, the Saints aren't very good. It will look different because 2022 first rounder Trevor Penning is making the switch to left tackle, so that could help the line. Center Eric McCoy and right tackle Ryan Ramczyk are both reliable when they're on the field. The Saints just really need to stay healthy because they weren't very healthy last year. And even if that's all they do now, the unit should be better. The Saints should probably end up being better this season on defense than offense, like they have for the last few seasons. The defensive line did still struggle to get pressure last season, which is probably why the Saints used their first 2 picks at the draft on the D-line. In the first round, New Orleans took defensive end Brian Breezy out of Clemson. Now, he was really good his first year in college and was even the ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year, but then in 2021, he tore his ACL and he didn't play too much in 2022 due to family matters. Then the Saints then took Isaiah Foskey in the second round. He's coming off of back-to-back 11-sack seasons at Notre Dame and was just a consensus All-American. Eventually, I'd assume he's going to pair up opposite of Cameron Jordan, who's literally been a Saint like as long as I can remember. He's entering his 13th year with them after he was a first-rounder way back in 2011. I was literally 11 years old when he was picked. He's an absolute dog. He's 34 now, and at some point, that production is going to slow down. The popular guy at linebacker for the Saints is Demario Davis. He was actually a Pro Bowler last season, and he's been an All-Pro in each of his last 4 years. He signed with the Saints in 2018, and he's been so good in New Orleans. Now, overall, on the entire team, the secondary is by far the best unit. Marshawn Lattimore did miss most of last season with a lacerated kidney, but he'll be back, and he's been one of the best cornerbacks in the league for a while now. He was a Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2017. He's been a Pro Bowler 4 times. Lattimore is the real deal. On the other side of him is probably gonna be Paulson Adebo. He's gonna look to just build on his rookie season. Then at safety, it's kind of similar. Tyrann Mathieu at times has been one of the best safeties in the league, but the big thing is health, and the Saints really need Marcus May to stay healthy, and they should end up being a pretty lethal duo if he can. Overall, I don't think the Saints roster is amazing, but I do think it's the best in the NFC South, and that's more of a representation of how bad the division is than anything. The Buccaneers have completely collapsed after the retirement of Tom Brady, as you'd expect. I think they'll be pretty bad, but Baker Mayfield is going to be their starter, so a lot of people are probably going to be rooting for them, like myself. The Panthers are going through a bit of a rebuild, and they just hired Frank Reich and took Bryce Young first overall. They may be good at some point, but I don't expect it to be this season. Finally, the Falcons are actually interesting. They have some really good offensive talent, but I don't quite believe in them. However, if Desmond Ridder is actually good, I think Atlanta will be the Saints' biggest competition for the division crown. The moral of the story, the Saints really aren't that good, but their division sucks and they have a pretty easy schedule. Once January comes around, I really don't expect anything from the Saints, but as far as the NFC South goes, they should be the kings of the division this year.